The next speaker will be Ambassador Toomas Pickerink, a former U.S. Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs and also a former ambassador in Israel. Please, Tom.
Amos and Shlomo and Ephraim, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. And I want to, as Bob prefigured, talk a little bit about the regional questions and how and in what way we see Iran figuring or not figuring in those areas. I want to leave history aside, except for the fact that history, of course, shapes all of our views and attitudes toward those questions, and in some respect, the possibilities that we can move ahead. To say that this area has been in turmoil is a massive understatement. Certainly for the last 3 or 4 years, we have seen what was once called the Arab Spring turn into the Arab transformation, and now I guess we can best call it a mess. But it is in that sense challenging and very difficult, and a very significant set of the kinds of questions that we and you here will be facing in the days and months ahead will in one way or another be influenced by and indeed looked at themselves by the Iranians and how they will move. I would be the last to tell you I can predict how that will happen. But I want to talk about 3 areas, one very briefly and 2 at a little later length, talk about some areas of common interest, and then talk about some of the challenges and the opportunities they provide. And anybody who thinks you could do this for the region in the next, whatever it is, 8 or 10 minutes I have has got to be crazy, but I'm crazy, so let me see if I can make it a go. There are 3 areas, I think, that are very important. One remote from you here, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I'll say just a few words. Then Iraq, and then certainly, most importantly, Syria. On Afghanistan and Pakistan, it seems to me that the Iranian interest remains high, and that we in the United States share with Iran an interest in not seeing a Taliban government in Afghanistan. Similarly, I think our assessment is that, at least my personal one is, that there are 2 critical factors that have to be looked after and indeed have to prove their worth, if I can put that on the table, to show whether, in fact, there is political and diplomatic progress that can be made. One is whether the Afghans themselves can defend their territory and enough of it to give the government a sense of stability and the population a sense of commitment for the time ahead. Secondly, there is an intrinsically closely related issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Will Pakistan keep supporting, in one way or another, the Afghan Taliban, even while, in fact, that Taliban organization is closely linked to the Pakistan Taliban, which is doing everything it can to upset equilibrium and stability in Pakistan? And so it's clearly time, and it has been for years, for the real Pakistanis to stand up. The problem is that isn't happening. So at the moment, I think the conditions and the circumstances for any kind of political context, buttressed as they must be by military activity, are very low. But if there were, Iran, I believe, would be committed to play a role that brings about a government in Afghanistan with which it can find friendliness and indeed receptivity, and that's not a Taliban government. The problem is complicated, you will all understand, by the new tactic of the Islamic State of leaping over frontiers, both close in and far away. And now there are established in at least one significant province of Afghanistan an important IS location, and we need to be very concerned about that. Iraq is even more complicated. No one can, I think, raise this to the level of simplicity to put it across, but I'll say a few things. One, we share with the Iranians there, I think, a sense that any long-term ISIS control in Iraq is against our interest and their interest. They have no interest in this. For them, it's part of, I guess, the Shia view as to how and in what way it would like to spread its relationships through the area into South Lebanon, as it has already, and beyond. For us, obviously, it's part and parcel of the future of a stable and indeed solid Iraq, something that we were not able to achieve by military action alone, and something at the moment is entirely testing the diplomacy. My sense is that there is no solely military solution to ISIS. And that doesn't mean I'm suggesting we sit down at the table and negotiate, not in the least. But it does mean that the Sunni portion of the Iraqi population has to become engaged, along with the Kurds, if ISIS is going to be pushed in any serious way out of the area they now control in Iraq. Mainly the north and a good bit of Anbar, at least along the transportation routes to the west. And that's a very serious challenge. And that challenge has to be requited on the Iraqi side by a shift in Shia leadership attitudes towards Sunni. Prime Minister Abadi has begun that process, but he speaks better than he delivers. Not an unknown phenomenon in diplomacy these days. And in some ways, that's a very important problem because the degree to which the Sunni ISIS can begin to dominate the Sunni picture in Iraq to that same degree, we will have even more difficult military problems. The Shia are not ready to sacrifice their sons to liberate the Sunni north. And that's a serious problem. We and the Iranians, interestingly enough, have in a quiet way been playing a common role. They have been training the Shia. We have been trying to get Sunnis to train. It's not an easy problem, particularly when we trained Sunnis in 2007 and 2008 and then left them behind. But that's the challenge. And our air attacks will continue. Many have, I think, underestimated the degree to which they have been useful in pushing ISIS. But they are not in of themselves the kind of answer that we would all expect to see. And so those challenges continue. I suspect coordination takes place through the Iraqis, but I'm not in the U.S. government, so I'm not in a position to confirm that. But we haven't killed any Iranians with our bombing, and that is in itself an example, at least, that the right hand and the left hand, at least temporarily, know what they're doing in Iraq, even if the effectiveness is open to question. Syria is a major and indeed challenging issue for all of us, and you living close to it here feel that as much as any of us do 6,000 to 7,000 miles away. But it is significant. Syria is a complex of a civil war with three major players, a difficult challenge to figure out what strategy is, a civil war in which a number of major players, including the Russians, have recently increased, as you know better than I do, their role in their activities. It is a civil war in which there is a Sunni side, in which there is a Shia-supported side, with the Russians playing a significant role, where I believe the eternal truism that there is no purely military solution in sight is realistic. Cast your mind back 3.5 years when people were saying in this region and beyond that in 3 months Assad will be gone. That didn't eventuate. On the other hand, nobody that I know of can tell you that in 3 months Assad will be back on top. I think that's equally far-fetched. So the really critical question here is which ways to move and which priorities to choose. There's no question at all that the Russian intervention came as a result of several things. First, a clear sense on the part of the Iranians that Assad was losing, both in Idlib province in the north next to the Alawite homeland and in the Syrian waste between the Alawite homeland and Damascus, where opposition forces were pinching off the routes that connected the two of them. The Russian Air Force was brought in to try to take care of that. My own sense is that for a while they did beat up some of the targets of people that we would like to support and have been supporting, but that's running out. And that in one result, at least, is that the Sunni opposition in Syria probably has never been as united before as it is now, at least temporarily, by the Russian attacks. I think the second issue here is very much how and in what way can the political events begin to be shaped to lead to some kind of useful conclusion with respect to Syria. It's a terrifically long shot. I think no one could stand up here now and tell you it's something that could be easily achieved. But what has happened is that in the last month, two important meetings have taken place to begin to address the problem. Meetings have been useful, but not perfect by any means. No diplomatic meetings are. But for the first time, Iranians and Saudis are at least sitting in the same room and staying there. It is also clear that I think over a period of time, the Russian interest in coming in to become part of the Syrian challenge, if I can call it that, is based not just on evening up the score temporarily for President Assad, but by doing so to at least achieve two or three other important results. One of those is to have a hand to play in the diplomacy, because they, I think, know and understand that their future in Syria rests not with Assad. They say so frequently in quiet corners, as indeed do the Iranians. And secondly, to try to deal at some arm's length with the 3,000 or so Russian Muslims from Chechnya alone who are playing an important role with the Islamic State, to say nothing of an estimated another 3,000 Muslims from other parts of Russia also deeply engaged there. And the Russians have shown interest, therefore, in the question of whether there can be a political future worked out for Syria. There are four baskets of questions, all closely interrelated, that have to be addressed or can be addressed in looking at the Syrian future. One is ceasefire, and a closely related question is the appointment of a transitional government, a government which is believed will have some Assad representation, but not be Assad's government. And that will be a huge issue to be disputed at the negotiating table. A government that may come into its own being over a period of time, and in concurrent fashion, perhaps, the ceasefires that already exist in Syria, partly because of fatigue and partly because of failure to achieve operational goals, can be extended and enlarged over a period of time. And those are important, and Iran can play a useful role. And my view is, to the degree to which the Russians are prepared to go, the Iranians don't have an awful lot of choice. To the degree to which the Iranians are prepared to go, the Russians are faced with an equally difficult challenge. So it remains for those who want to see progress to try to manage those two issues with great care. The third and fourth steps in Syria are even more difficult. Setting down the ways in which a new Syrian government should be organized and perform. And to me, that is obviously the key opportunity to deal with the problem that Henry Kissinger defined a year ago as Assad in at the beginning but out at the end. And that coupled with a suggestion, quite insistently a suggestion from the Iranian side, that there be some kind of an electoral process inside Syria. Well, anyone who imagines that Syria under the present stage could have any kind of an election has certainly got to be in the loco category. But over a period of time, one may see that happening. And there the bet is not, as the Iranians believe, that Assad enjoys this wide popularity which will sustain him through an election at some period in the future. But in my view, whether the Sunni opposition and the others who have been brutalized can manage to make that happen. And how and in what way all of this fits together with that most essential objective of seeing whether we can turn, to the greatest extent possible, all of the Syrians who are armed and prepared to do so, to move against ISIS and to stop, in fact, taking a toll on each other. The problem is real. Europe is now assailed by refugees. The problem is significant. 300,000 deaths and growing as we speak, and maybe up to 8 or 9 million Syrians displaced internally or externally. Certainly food for the Islamic State to feast upon. And now we have to see what can be done. It will not be quick. It will not be easy. It will not be predictable. But there is, at this point, a slight opening, and Iran will play an important role in that, whether we like it or not. I can't predict whether the nuclear agreement made any change in Iranian attitudes. I rather doubt it. I think they're looking at their long-term interests in the region, and we will just have to watch that very closely and see where it goes. Thank you for your time. It was good talking to you.